Well, by now you've heard that Jimmy Kimmel has been fired, canceled, trash canned. I'm sorry, no. I believe the euphemism that Disney ABC put out was indefinitely suspended. And it's all based on remarks that he made. You know, he wanted to tell a joke to everyone the Monday after the murder of Charlie Kirk. But of course, the entire joke, which never should have been said in the first place, was based on a lie. And now the reaction to this from the left is completely unhinged. And of course, as usual, the only way they can make their point is to, well, tell their own set of lies. We're going to give you the facts and the reality about why ABC did what it did. But first, here's President Trump just moments ago, joint press conference with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He was asked about Jimmy Kimmel, and of course, he shared his opinion.
Well, Jimmy Kimmel was fired because he had bad ratings more than anything else. And he said a horrible thing about a great gentleman known as Charlie Kirk. And Jimmy Kimmel is not a talented person. He had very bad ratings, and they should have fired him a long time ago. So, you can call that free speech or not. He was fired for lack of talent.
Okay, well, that's a good way to put it. And there's a lot of data, a lot of facts, and a lot of news that we're going to share with you that backs up that opinion. Let's start with this, the ratings. The ratings across the board in all of the late night shows have been plummeting, as you can see from these graphs, all the way to the far left. It'll be 2011, then 2012, 2013. You can see 2014, 2015, all these shows seem to hit their peak, whether it's Jimmy Kimmel Live in blue, Late Show with Stephen Colbert in orange, yellow, let's call it, or The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon in red. Now, these are Nielsen ratings, not share of viewers. They'll often talk about their share, but you see, the share only tells you what percentage of people watching television at that moment you get. So as that pie shrinks, you may still have the same share or you may get a bigger share. But if the pie is shrinking, that means there's fewer people watching, and that means that your advertisers aren't getting a good bang for their buck. These numbers you're looking at right here are not share, the percentage of that shrinking pie. This is the shrinking pie. These are ratings points. And at its peak in 2013, you can see that Jimmy Kimmel was getting a 0.71 share. I did the math for you. That means about 850,000 households, which, by the way, I got to be honest, this show last week beat those kind of numbers on a daily basis for several days. This show, and I assure you, we don't have the staff and the budget, and the host does not get the same kind of salary that Jimmy Kimmel gets. So at its peak, 11 years ago, Jimmy Kimmel was getting a 0.71 ratings point from Nielsen. That's about 850,000 households. That specifically, by the way, is persons 18 to 49, which is a pretty wide demographic wedge. But take a look at the precipitous drop in ratings. As of this year, 24-25, that 0.71 rating has dropped to 0.16. That translates to about 180,000. And once again, just in terms of comparing to this show, we do that every day. We do that every day. We beat that every day in terms of the full episode and segments. Jimmy Kimmel Live at 11:30 p.m. with a giant staff and a huge multi-million-dollar budget on the ABC network was pulling about 180 to 185,000 households. Just a disaster. An absolute disaster. He was also fired, as the president said, for a joke. Now, first of all, let's just be clear. It wasn't a joke. But if you would like to give it some grace and generosity and be as tolerant as possible, you can say, okay, fine. He told a joke about how President Trump wasn't really mourning the loss of Charlie Kirk. Now, understand something. On Monday, when the writers met to talk about that night's monologue, somebody in the room said, hey, I've got a joke about the murder of Charlie Kirk. And nobody in the room said, yeah, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe not. Maybe one person said, murder, probably not. No, okay. Oh, no. Don't get me wrong. It's not a joke about Charlie Kirk or murdering Charlie Kirk. It's a joke about Donald Trump not showing really any outward sign of grieving. Oh, well, okay, if we can make fun of Trump, then yes, let's do the joke about the murder of Charlie Kirk. That was the thought process. And to set up the joke, if you want to call it that, Jimmy Kimmel told a lie. Jimmy Kimmel told a damnable lie. Here's how the New York Times described it. We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. That was the setup to the big knee slapper. And it's just a lie. And nobody in the Jimmy Kimmel hierarchy, whether in the writer's room or a producer for the show or anyone at the network, saw that and said, nope, let's not do this. Everyone's giving credit to ABC and Disney for pulling the plug on Jimmy Kimmel 2 days after the fact. But what about the people who worked for ABC Disney who saw this and gave it the green light to run that night? Because you see, they tape this show around 5 o'clock in the afternoon in Hollywood. It doesn't run until 6 hours later. Many people in the standards and practices department, if they have any standards at ABC, watched it and they were fine with it. Not only is it a damnable lie, not only is it a lie that we all knew was a lie by the time they taped this late Monday afternoon, but it's a lie that suggests that Charlie Kirk basically created his own monster that killed him. That he sort of deserved it after all because it was one of his that he had created. It's despicable. It's disgusting. And I want to reiterate, ABC Disney was fine with it Monday night. And oh, by the way, they were fine with it all day Tuesday. Even after the Salt Lake City press conference where the district attorney laid out the text messages and evidence that proved without a shadow of a doubt that this murderer was motivated by left-wing hate, Jimmy Kimmel and Disney and ABC did and said nothing. And he taped another show and he didn't correct the record. He didn't retract and he didn't apologize. It wasn't until yesterday, Wednesday afternoon, when things really reached a head because we let our voices be heard. Which brings us to the real root of the demise of Jimmy Kimmel. It has to do with the companies, not ABC, the companies that own the television stations around the country. Everybody thinks that ABC owns your local station. And to be fair, ABC, NBC, and CBS do own some of their local stations, but very few of them. Most of them are owned by separate companies. These used to be sort of mom and pop local companies that when television first started, they decided, hey, we're going to own a television station. And over the years, of course, most of them have been bought up and consolidated by companies that own these television stations. And then they make a broadcasting syndication agreement with one of the big far networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox. Now, there are two companies that are dominant in the ABC broadcast group. That would be Nexstar and Sinclair. Nexstar, the largest television station company, announced that they had had so many complaints from their viewers, you know, in flyover country, that they were pulling the plug and they were not going to run Jimmy Kimmel's show at 11:30 after their local news. You know, they were going to start showing, reruns of Friends or something. Then came Sinclair Group. Sinclair Group doesn't have as many stations as Nexstar, but they actually have the largest number of ABC stations, especially in major markets. Sinclair put out this statement. Sinclair, the nation's largest ABC affiliate group, objects to recent comments made by Mr. Kimmel concerning the assassination of Charlie Kirk. As discussed with ABC earlier today, Sinclair decided to indefinitely preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live beginning tonight. Following these discussions, ABC suspended production of Jimmy Kimmel Live. So understand something. Both of the two largest ABC broadcast partners who own the local stations that ABC has an agreement with, they said, you're not going to have Jimmy Kimmel Live running anymore. That means that all of those national advertisers that ABC sells national spots to, like Chevy and Ford and McDonald's and whoever was on the Jimmy Kimmel show that they're making all that money for, those ads were no longer going to be seen on all of those television stations. That means the value of those ads plummeted. That means there was no more revenue coming in for Jimmy Kimmel Live. That means that there was no more money to keep the lights on. And that's why ABC Disney did what they did. Do not believe any of the lies you're hearing that there was pressure from the FCC or from Brendan Carr. We'll get to those lies in a minute. But this was my favorite part of the Sinclair statement. This is the real tell. Mr. Kimmel's remarks were inappropriate and deeply insensitive at a critical moment of our country, said Vice Chairman Jason Smith. We believe broadcasters have a responsibility to educate and elevate respectful, constructive dialogue in our communities. We appreciate FCC Chairman Carr's remarks today, and this incident, highlights the critical need for the FCC to take immediate regulatory action to address control held over local broadcasters by the big national networks. In other words, far from this being a big, giant, fascist, elephantine regulatory foot stomp on the throats of ABC, CBS, and NBC by Brendan Carr and Donald Trump, it's the people who own the local broadcast stations who actually hold the FCC license. See, people forget that. The network does not license with the FCC. It's the local stations in every city that have the license to broadcast. Sinclair is actually asking the FCC to increase their presence with the networks. They're not worried about First Amendment infringements by the FCC. These are the people who hold the license, and in their statement, they're asking the FCC to do more. Do you hear that reported anywhere? On cable news or broadcast news? Did you read that in the New York Times? And of course you didn't. It completely upends the fake narrative that they're trying to put out there right now. By the way, further in their statement, Sinclair, just to sort of twist the knife a little bit more on Jimmy Kimmel, said this: Sinclair will not lift the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel Live on our stations until formal discussions are held with ABC regarding the network's commitment to professionalism and accountability. Sinclair also call upon Mr. Kimmel to issue a direct apology to the Kirk family. Furthermore, Sinclair asks Mr. Kimmel to make a meaningful personal donation to the Kirk family and Turning Point USA. And finally, Sinclair announced that this Friday night in Jimmy Kimmel's slot, they will be airing their own produced tribute to Charlie Kirk's life and legacy. God, that's beautiful. And you know what makes it really beautiful? It pisses Jimmy Kimmel off more than anything you can imagine. That narcissistic, egotistical, arrogant bastard. He hates this. Another thing contributing to ABC Disney's decision, according to The Hollywood Reporter, a source says that Kimmel was prepared to address the backlash on Wednesday's show. He planned to explain what he said and demonstrate how it was taken out of context. Oh, lovely. When asked by The Hollywood Reporter, the source said that Kimmel was not planning on apologizing. He felt that what he said did not require an apology. So in other words, he was going to make it part of his opening monologue. It was going to be a joke, and we were going to be the butt of it for being so stupid and moronic and hypocritical and totalitarian that we can't even take a joke. And Disney said, all right, that's it. It's just going to get worse. We're done. And so they did what they did, and rightly so, and appropriately so. Do you know how we know they made the right decision? Because of reactions like this. Keith Olbermann says, burn in hell, Sinclair, alongside Charlie Kirk. When you're pissing off all the right people, you know you're on the right side of the story. It has been said that Keith Olbermann is really just upset because he's run out of places to get fired from. And I think that that's a fair observation. The Democrats on their official Democrat Party social media said, legalize comedy, free Jimmy Kimmel. And our friend Ryan James Gerdusky beautifully replied, as you can see, with a screenshot of Charlie Kirk's own tweet from 2017. Jimmy Kimmel isn't funny. Nobody is making comedy illegal. And if anyone were trying to make comedy illegal, I assure you, Jimmy Kimmel would not be in the FBI's top 10 most wanted. Elizabeth Warren says, first Colbert, now Kimmel, last-minute settlements, secret side deals, multi-billion-dollar mergers pending Donald Trump's approval. Trump silencing free speech stifles our democracy. It sure looks like giant media companies are enabling his authoritarianism. Yeah, because ABC and Disney, Bob Iger, are totally right-wingers, Liz. And I want to be clear here. Nobody has silenced Jimmy Kimmel. Nothing is stopping Jimmy Kimmel from doing literally exactly what I'm doing right now. Jimmy's got a better computer than I do, probably, and a nicer camera. Jimmy, no one's stopping you. Tell your jokes. Let's go. Compete head-to-head with us. Let's see what happens. He's not being silenced. He can say whatever he wants. But there is some notion out here that we'll explore later from some geniuses in the Democrat Party that Jimmy Kimmel has a constitutional right to a television show. We'll show you that coming up in a sec. Gavin Newsom, there is no such thing as free speech under Donald Trump's reign. I would like to take this moment to notify everyone, including Gavin Newsom, who apparently is not familiar with Gavin Newsom, that Gavin Newsom proposed and signed into law a prohibition of anybody putting out an AI version of Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris in a satire on social media. Of course, it was just struck down by the Supreme Court, but Gavin Newsom, free speech warrior, didn't want to be mocked on social media. So he, as governor, passed a law prohibiting it. He also, by the way, excuse me. Also, by the way, what did he say? There's no such thing as free speech under Donald Trump's reign. During the pandemic, he outlawed going to church. And when he lost that fight in court, he outlawed people singing in church. Gavin Newsom, free speech warrior. Gavin Newsom also said buying and controlling media platforms, firing commentators, canceling shows. These aren't coincidences. It's coordinated. It's dangerous. The GOP doesn't believe in free speech. They're censoring you in real time. You know, it's that kind of talk that could actually fire people up and inspire them to turn to violence if they're feeling hopeless. Gavin. They just can't stop. They just can't stop calling you a fascist. Chuck Schumer says America is meant to be a bastion of free speech. Everybody across the political spectrum should be speaking out to stop what's happening to Jimmy Kimmel. This is about protecting democracy. This must go to court. Oh, please, Jimmy Kimmel, sue. Oh, I'm begging Jimmy Kimmel to sue. That would be a beautiful thing. Hakeem Jeffries, minority leader in the House, along with his whip and his vice chair and whoever else signed on to this. Brendan Carr, the so-called chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. What does that even mean? What do you mean so-called? He is the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. They're so bad. Even when they're lying, they're bad. Even when has engaged in the corrupt abuse of power. He has disgraced the office he holds by bullying ABC, the employer of Jimmy Kimmel, and forcing the company to bend the knee to the Trump administration. FCC chair Brendan Carr should resign immediately. Can I just remind you, the ABC does not hold any FCC licenses. It's only the local stations that hold those licenses. Adam Schiff said Kimmel, Colbert, suits against the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and 60 Minutes, extorting settlements from CBS, ABC, and others, blocking the AP's access to the White House. This administration is responsible for the most blatant attacks on the free press in American history. What will be left of the First Amendment when he's done? It's funny. I didn't know that Jimmy Kimmel was a news entity and a reporter. The free press? Disney. Notice how none of them are angry at Disney or at ABC. They're all angry at Trump and Brendan Carr. Maybe it's me, but I think that's kind of a tell. Like, if you really believe that Brendan Carr and Donald Trump are bullying, why aren't you angry at the weaklings who are bending the knee to the bully? And the reason why you don't see any anger from them is because they're friends. And they get lots of political donations from the likes of Disney and from ABC. And they also know that ABC's in the tank with them. My favorite left-wing reaction, maybe this one, Jim Acosta. In fact, this picture right here, just frame it, hang it in the Louvre, maybe the Smithsonian. This is a Substack podcast waiting to happen. Beautiful. Jimmy Kimmel deserves better than this. He's a class act. Let me pause there for a second. I just want you to know, only because I used to work in entertainment. I used to work in Southern California. I work in radio. Jimmy Kimmel got his start in radio. I know people who have been in Jimmy Kimmel's orbit. Let me just tell you something. You're seeing all of these tributes about Jimmy Kimmel from politicians, from journalists, right? From television, cable news commentators, all talking about how great Jimmy Kimmel is and how terrible this is. I'm going to make a prediction as this story plays out. Guess what you're not going to hear? You are not going to hear from people who worked with Jimmy Kimmel about what a great guy he is, how generous he was, what a wonderful person he was. You did hear that about Stephen Colbert, by the way, and I do believe that that's genuinely true. I think that Stephen Colbert, on a personal basis and on a working basis, was actually a pretty good guy to the people in the staff and his writers and things like that. Let me just say, if you haven't noticed already, you're not hearing that from the people who worked in that studio and worked on that set. A couple of people might say something just because, they're upset that their paycheck is gone. But no one's shedding a tear for Jimmy Kimmel if they worked with Jimmy Kimmel, or for that matter, have a history in the business with Jimmy Kimmel. And certainly, if you used to be married to Jimmy Kimmel, Google that relationship and what Jimmy did after he made it big. That tells you everything you know about people. Anyway, he's a class act, says Jim Acosta, and he knows a class act when he sees it. Case in point, after my first appearance on his show back in 2018, don't you love it when people immediately have to tell their own personal story about this? This is in the news, so let me tell you my story. This horrible thing happened to Jimmy Kimmel. Now, about me, and when I was on his show in 2018, he very thoughtfully asked whether I was receiving adequate security at that time, as Trump was repeatedly smearing journalists as the enemy of the people. Comments that resulted in threats aimed at many of us in the White House press corps. I'll never forget that moment of kindness from Jimmy. It spoke volumes. Make no mistake, our right to free speech is under attack in this country. This right must be defended as it is essential to the American way of life. Who's silencing Jim Acosta? Jim Acosta can say whatever he wants. I love that all of these people go to a social media platform owned by a man that they have slandered and defamed and slimed as a Hitler-saluting Nazi and have tried to ruin his businesses, right? They all have tried to defame and slime and slander and ruin Elon Musk, and yet they all go on the platform that he owns, and they have all the freedom in the world to say whatever they want. And what they say is they are losing their right to free speech and free expression and the First Amendment. Does anyone recognize that irony? That's funny irony. There's some tragic irony that I want to point out with their hypocrisy in a bit. But I also want to point out one other thing about Jim Acosta's reflection here. It was so touching and so wonderful for Jimmy Kimmel to ask me if I'm getting adequate security. All he did was ask him something. And by the way, he asked him a question at the expense of Trump, right? It was really to sort of show that Trump is putting his life in danger. You know what would have been really cool? If Jimmy Kimmel had reached into his multi-million dollar pocket and maybe paid for security himself. That's where I thought the story was going. And then Jimmy Kimmel single-handedly, without any fanfare and without anyone knowing, paid for additional security for reporters in Washington, D.C. No, that's not where the story went. Jim Acosta is crediting Jimmy Kimmel for being a really class act, one of the best guys in the business, because he offhandedly asked, hey, by the way, you get enough security there? Oh my God, thank you for asking. It's unbelievable what it takes to be called a class act by Jim Acosta. Jessica Charloff, our favorite lib over on Fox News, said free speech advocates on the right have a lot of heavy lifting to do because apparently we'd be hypocrites if we actually think this is the right move for Jimmy Kimmel to be let go by ABC based on all of the details, all the facts, and all the business realities that I just laid out for you. Apparently, we're supposed to be crying a river for Jimmy Kimmel. Otherwise, we're First Amendment free speech hypocrites. It's a heavy lift. Yeah, well, her colleague Greg Gutfeld replied, yeah, pretty easy lift, actually, Greg says. You have a right to be wrong. The company you work for has a right to pull you for it. The heavy lifting is on your end, or you would have made your case. And then later, Greg Gutfeld made an even more important point this morning. I have friends who will be performing in front of live audiences that number in the thousands. They aren't worried about being fired. They're worried now about being fired upon. CNN hacks can't grasp that because they've never had to worry about such threats or an audience. And that's the dark, dark irony that I want you to always remember. Everything that you just saw, and we've got more of the left's unhinged reaction and screaming with their hair on fire about how the First Amendment and free speech is under assault because Jimmy Kimmel got fired. And yet last week, a 31-year-old young man, a father of 2 toddlers, sat on a college campus holding a microphone and literally opening up another microphone so anybody, no matter what they thought, could come and express themselves and disagree with him and challenge him so he could have an open dialogue with him. And that young man got a bullet in the throat and he was assassinated. And every single one of the people that I just showed you screaming about Jimmy Kimmel and the First Amendment, they may have given lip service to, oh, well, this is awful, and we disavow political violence. Both sides are guilty of it. Whatever bromide they threw out there, because their comms director over in the House of Representatives crafted a post for their X account. Not one of them said, this is a terrifying day for free speech. This is a threat to the First Amendment. When an assassin's bullet can send a message to a conservative commentator and talk show host and to everyone else on the right that their ideas and their opinions are worthy of cold-blooded murder, not one of these hypocrites on the left said that Charlie Kirk's assassination could blow a chill wind across this country when it comes to free political speech. But Jimmy Kimmel, oh, that's where the line is drawn. Meanwhile, Brendan Carr speaks for himself. Last night, the chairman of the FCC on Hannity actually explains what's going on here.
Yeah, broadcasters are different than any other form of communication, including here. We're on cable right now. Fox News doesn't have an FCC license. CNN doesn't. But ABC, CBS, NBC, those broadcast stations do. And with that license comes a unique obligation to operate in the public interest. And over the years, the FCC walked away from enforcing that public interest obligation. I don't think we're better off as a country for it. But look, President Trump ran directly at these legacy broadcast outlets, and he exposed them to these market forces. And a lot of these affiliate groups said, to your point, we're tired of carrying this stuff. Late night shows, something's gone seriously awry there. They went from going for applause, from laugh lines to applause lines. They went from being court jesters that would make fun of everybody in power to being court clerics and enforcing a very narrow political ideology. And Nexstar, as you noted, stood up and said, look, we have the license and we don't want to run this anymore. We don't think it serves the interest of our community. Sinclair did the same thing. So there's more work to go, but I'm very glad to see that America's broadcasters are standing up to serve the interests of their community. We don't just have this progressive foie gras coming out from New York and Hollywood.
I hope that in the executive suites of ABC, they are having a conversation today, and they're looking at their lineup and their rundown and their broadcast day. And somebody in one of these rooms says, "Excuse me, how is The View serving the public interest?" I mean, maybe we should sort of rethink that programming decision. Trust me, Joy Behar, Sonny Hostin, Whoopi Goldberg, they're quaking right now. Oh, did I mention hypocrisy from the left? I think I did, but let me just display it a little bit further for you as we wind up this opening segment. Chris Hayes, first of all, on MSNBC, had some really, really concerning words about the First Amendment if Jimmy Kimmel loses his job. Watch.
ABC made the announcement Kimmel would indeed be taken off the air indefinitely. And this is just the latest chapter in Donald Trump's ongoing campaign to crack down on free speech, dominate the media, and essentially render the First Amendment meaningless. So it was for the journeyman cable news host Tucker Carlson, just fired from his third network. He believed he could say anything, no matter how vile, no matter how disgusting, no matter how offensive, no matter how dehumanizing or belittling. And if you act like a sociopath over and over and over and over, you will become unpopular on the national stage. That's just like a basic principle. Over time, probably not going to work out well for you in the long run. Eventually, people will be rightly offended, disgusted by it. ABC.
There you go. That's the same guy. Chris Hayes seemed to have a different message when Tucker Carlson got fired for his content than when Jimmy Kimmel got fired for his content. Chris Hayes isn't alone. He's no outlier. There seems to be a pattern of behavior here when it comes to Tucker Carlson losing his job.
Tucker Carlson is out at Fox News. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. What I will say, though, is while I'm very glad that the person that was arguably responsible for some of the largest, driving some of the most amounts of death threats and violent threats, not just to my office, but to plenty of people across the country. I also kind of feel like I'm like waiting for the cutscene at the end of a Marvel movie after all the credits have rolled. And then you see like the villain's like hand reemerge out to grip over like the end of a building or something. But deplatforming works and it is important. And there you go. Good things can happen.
God, she's smart. Deplatforming works. Okay, thank you. Noted. Deplatforming works. How about the leader of the Democrats in Washington, D.C., Chuck Schumer?
These lies continue tonight. Rupert Murdoch, who has admitted they were lies and said he regretted it, has a special obligation to stop Tucker Carlson from going on tonight now that he's seen how he has perverted and slimed the truth, and from letting them go on again and again and again. Not because their views deserve such opprobrium, but because our democracy depends on it.
That's right. That's a sitting senator, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate at the time, calling on Rupert Murdoch, the chairman of the Fox News Corporation, to fire Tucker Carlson. But Jimmy Kimmel losing his job because the broadcast stations pulled out and refused to play his show, that's a direct threat to the First Amendment. Amazing how the double standards are there. And these people operate as though we have no ability to find what they said in the past. For instance, here's Matt Iglesias. Brendan Carr, the FCC chairman, killed the First Amendment on Constitution Day. That's Matt Iglesias last night. Matt Iglesias, just a couple years ago. Kind of weird that deplatforming Trump just like completely worked with no visible downside whatsoever. He was celebrating deplatforming and removing the former president from all social media sites. That works on two levels, of course. The second level is that it didn't seem to actually work because Donald Trump ended up winning about 10 times bigger than back in 2021. Harry Sisson last night said we are witnessing the most brazen attack on free speech in modern American history. Elon, Trump, and MAGA said they were free speech warriors. It's the exact opposite. But Harry Sisson, when Donald Trump was kicked off of Twitter, happy 1-year anniversary of Donald Trump being banned from Twitter. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble figuring out the consistency of their message here. I thought they were champions of the First Amendment and free speech. It seems to be only operating in one direction. This guy, Hassanabi, and what is his actual name? I don't know.
Hassan Piker.
Thank you, Hassan Piker. These are all influencers, by the way. Every corporation is instantly folding to the administration, even when it's over an utterly inoffensive joke. Inoffensive. The admin doesn't like. Liberals need to wake up. We all have had to fight back. These wealthy a-holes aren't going to stand up for anything beyond their bottom line. Of course, back when fellow leftist Cenk Uygur raised a little bit of a red flag about Megyn Kelly getting fired, I can't believe Megyn Kelly was fired. I 100% disagree with the decision. I think what she said was wrong, and I totally disagree with her politics, but firing her over that comment is not remotely the right way to handle this. Talk about it on air instead. More speech, not less, which, by the way, Cenk, thank you. I appreciate that. But Hassan said, this ain't it, chief.com. In other words, celebrating Megyn Kelly getting fired. And finally, the pièce de résistance of the hypocrisy of people who are celebrating people like Megyn Kelly and Donald Trump being deplatformed comes from none other than Jimmy Kimmel himself. He depicted what he imagined in his fantasy life, Donald Trump sitting on the toilet looking at his phone and realizing that his account had been suspended. Live look at Trump's bathroom from Jimmy Kimmel. Of course, the good news is, as we take a quick look at that, Donald Trump, when he was suspended, decided to get his friends together and create his own social media platform, Truth Social, and it's worth billions now. When Tucker Carlson was fired, he decided to go independent, and he created his own platform and streams a show still, and he has made way more money and gets much more distribution for his content than he ever did when he was on Fox News Channel. And of course, Megyn Kelly, our dear friend Megyn Kelly, after being fired from MSNBC, decided to start her own podcast, turn on a camera, plugged in a microphone, and now she gets more downloads than CBS and NBC News combined on streaming platforms. So the good news for Jimmy Kimmel is that he can do that. Just like all of those people they just celebrated for being deplatformed, Jimmy Kimmel can do that. Stephen Colbert can do that. Jim Acosta can do that. Joy Reid can do that. Don Lemon can do that. Terry Moran can do that. All of these lefties who got fired, they can just do that. Why don't they? Why don't they just go independent and compete in the free market, the open market, instead of living in that protected little left-wing corporate world that has paid you handsomely and allowed you to do whatever you want and lose your audience by the millions? Why don't you just come on out here and play? Let's compete and let the best man or woman win. Why don't they? We know why. We know why.